In the pitch-black early hours of August 8th, 1963, a Royal Mail train, known as the Up Special, thundered down the tracks from Glasgow to London, carrying something far more valuable than letters. Inside its high-value packages coach sat 120 heavy sacks, stuffed with $2.6 million in crisp, unmarked banknotes, the equivalent of roughly $60 million or $75 million in today's money. It was supposed to be just another routine night run after a bank holiday weekend in Scotland. But for 15 men led by the charismatic mastermind Bruce Reynolds, this was the night they would pull off what the world still calls the heist of the century. Picture it, the train's headlights slicing through thick fog as it approaches a lonely stretch of line near Bridego Bridge in Buckinghamshire. The driver, 58-year-old Jack Mills, a seasoned railway man from Crewe with decades of service, suddenly sees the green signal turn blood red. He eases the brakes, confused but obedient. His co-driver steps out to check the trackside phone. That single moment of hesitation changed everything. Out of the darkness, 15 masked figures swarm the locomotive like ghosts. Bruce Reynolds, 32 years old, tall, sharp-featured, with piercing eyes, and that unmistakable air of a man who always had a plan, gives the signal. They had studied the timetable for months, tipped off by a mysterious inside source known only as the Ulsterman. No guns, no explosives, just gloves, a 6-volt battery, and an iron bar. The gang covered the green light, wired the battery to force the red signal on, and waited. It was devastatingly simple and brutally effective. Jack Mills never stood a chance. When he refused to move the train exactly as ordered, one of the robbers swung that iron bar with savage force. The crack echoed inside the cab. Blood sprayed across the controls. Mills collapsed, concussed, bleeding, never the same again. He would suffer for the rest of his shortened life, dying in 1970, partly from the lingering trauma. His co-driver was overpowered too. The gang forced the injured Mills back to the controls and made him drive the engine and the two precious carriages half a mile down the track to the bridge where their getaway trucks waited. Under that bridge, in the dead of night, the human chain formed. Sack after sack flew from hand to hand in a perfectly rehearsed ballet of crime. In just 30 minutes, every single bag of cash was loaded into the waiting Land Rovers. $2.6 million vanished into the English countryside as if it had never existed. The gang sped off to their pre-purchased hideout. Leatherslade Farm, a run-down, isolated property between Oakley and Brill that they had bought months earlier under a false name. Back at the farm, the adrenaline finally crashed. The men tore off their masks, counted the money in piles that reached the ceiling, and then, in one of the most infamous acts of sheer cockiness in criminal history, they sat down and played Monopoly. Not with plastic money, with the real stolen fiver notes. They laughed, drank, ate, and left fingerprints and sauce stains everywhere. They even hired a cleanup crew to burn the entire farm to the ground and destroy every trace. But the crew never followed through. They simply drove away and left the evidence untouched. When the police finally raided Leatherslade Farm days later, they found a treasure trove of clues. The Monopoly board still laid out. Sauce bottles, cash wrappers, fingerprints belonging to almost every member of the gang. It was the beginning of the end. Within months, most of the 15 men were behind bars. The judge at the Old Bailey handed down record 30-year sentences, calling the crime an affront to the nation. Bruce Reynolds, the mastermind, was eventually caught after 5 years on the run. But one name would become synonymous with the robbery forever: Ronnie Biggs. Biggs, 34 years old on the night of the heist, had played a relatively minor role, but his escape turned him into a global legend. In 1965, he scaled the wall of Wandsworth Prison with a homemade rope ladder, vanished into the night, and underwent plastic surgery in Paris to change his face. He fled first to Australia, then to Brazil, where he lived openly as a celebrity fugitive for 36 years, signing autographs, giving interviews, even recording music. Scotland Yard seethed while Biggs sipped caipirinhas on Copacabana Beach. He only returned to Britain in 2001, old, ill, and broken, to spend his final years in prison before dying in 2030s. Most of the $2.6 million was never recovered. It was laundered through crooked accountants, spent on fast cars and luxury homes, or simply vanished into the underworld. The robbery became instant folklore. Books, films, documentaries, the Great Train Robbery captured the public imagination like nothing else. It was audacious, meticulously planned, and carried out with military precision, yet undone by the most childish mistake imaginable. Compare it to the 1855 Great Gold Robbery, when criminals used sophisticated lockpicking on a moving train to steal gold bullion and replaced it with lead shot. No violence, no fingerprints, almost perfect. But the 1963 version had everything: the dramatic signal stop, the brutal assault on an innocent driver, the Monopoly game with real money, the decades-long manhunt, and one man living like a rock star in exile. That's why it remains the heist of the century. If you're as hooked on this case as we are, make sure to follow the channel right now so you never miss future deep dives like this. The violence against Jack Mills left a permanent scar on British crime history. A decent working man doing his job was left with lifelong injuries, so a gang could live like kings. The fingerprints on that Monopoly board proved that even the cleverest criminals are human, and humans make stupid mistakes. The missing millions still spark conspiracy theories today. Was the Ulsterman a high-level insider who was never caught? Did some of the cash fund other crimes? We may never know. But one thing is certain. On that foggy August night in 1963, 15 ordinary men from the London underworld became legends. Their crime was bold, their escape dramatic, their downfall almost poetic. The Great Train Robbery wasn't just about money. It was about audacity, about beating the system, about a moment when ordinary criminals wrote themselves into history. And every time a train whistle sounds through the English countryside at night, some people still wonder, could it happen again? Hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next wild true crime story. We've got plenty more coming. Thanks for watching. Stay curious. Stay safe. See you in the next one.